Urgent. A devastating ruling from the Supreme Court on the scheme. Koldo sentences José Luis Ábalos to 24 years and 3 months in prison and Koldo García to 19 years. And Victor de Aldama to 4.5 years. Won't he go to prison? Let's begin. Hello everyone, welcome to this special and urgent edition of Precautionary Measures. We finally have the Supreme Court's ruling on the first part of the Koldo scheme, known as the mass case. And pay attention because there is a devastating verdict. There are harsh sentences against José Luis Ábalos, against Koldo García, and also, very importantly, Victor de Aldama will not go to prison. Because although he is sentenced to 4 years in prison, the execution of this sentence is suspended due to his cooperation with the justice system. We have the Supreme Court's verdict, 224 pages. We are going to share it as we always do. Of course, if you haven't done it yet, remember to subscribe to the Medidas Cautelares channel. We already have 135,000 subscribers. Really, 135,000, thank you. And we're heading straight for 150,000, and now we're putting this devastating Supreme Court verdict on the screen. For Pedro Sánchez, for the government, because we must not forget that José Luis Ábalos was Pedro Sánchez's right-hand man. Here you have it, Supreme Court ruling number 418/2026. Judges Andrés Martínez Arrieta, Julián Sánchez Melgar, Manuel Marchena, Andrés Palomo, Susana Polo, Eduardo de Porres, Javier Hernández. First of all, and this is very important, it's a unanimous ruling. There are no dissenting opinions. All the judges, all 7 of them, are in agreement. In agreement on this ruling. And pay attention, because we're going to get to the heart of this ruling, because there's a section that's especially important. Page 48 says the Supreme Court. Currently, we can talk about corruption in the sense of a breakdown of the organizational model set up for the management of matters with financial implications, whose basis lies in the violation of a duty to act according to the model designed by the legal system, because anyone who becomes corrupt breaks the rules of their position or duties. That organizational model can be understood as the set of rules that, in each specific case, regulate social behavior according to the declared principles and values of the Constitution. Corrupt behavior is carried out through an act that violates duty and is linked to the expectation of obtaining a benefit that to which they would not be entitled if they had acted according to their position. The concept of corruption is defined as any violation by an individual of the rules that govern their activity, with the aim of obtaining, for themselves or for a third party, an advantage of any kind that they could not achieve if they had acted in accordance with the regulations. This perspective allows us to understand corruption not only as an economic offense, but also as a phenomenon that affects the integrity of organizations, both public and private. And trust in their functioning in many cases represents a mechanism for accessing, maintaining, or exploiting power for illicit purposes. Dismantling institutional controls, appropriating public resources, manipulating administrative decisions, or conditioning public policies for one's own benefit or that of others. Its seriousness lies in the fact that it erodes the foundations of the democratic state by distorting the purpose of public power and turning it into an instrument at the service of private interests, says the Supreme Court. As a result, it has an expansive impact that goes beyond its economic harm or the violation of duties by public officials. Its most serious effect is the deterioration of citizens' trust in the political system by breaking the expectation that democratic power is exercised for the benefit of all citizens. A society that perceives that those in positions of power act guided by private interest or interest unrelated to public service in order to obtain a benefit experiences a loss of institutional legitimacy that compromises the stability of the system itself. That is to say, the Supreme Court offers a sweeping condemnation of how corruption has become integrated into the state, how there is systemic corruption, and this of course leads to citizens' distrust. It says that it should be kept in mind that in our case, the one who breaks the rules of the position is, among others, an authority of special state relevance in his capacity as Minister of Government of Spain, Ábalos, who is also the party's Secretary of Organization supporting the government. The acts analyzed not only seek a benefit, but are carried out from the exercise of public power and political power. at the highest level of constitutional bodies, such as the government, which according to Article 97 of the Constitution directs domestic and foreign policy, civil and military administration, and the defense of the state. And it exercises the executive function and regulatory authority in accordance with the Constitution and the laws. In this way, acts of corruption are not only crimes involving assets or crimes committed by bad public servants who occasionally violate their positional duties. These are behaviors that have a direct connection with the exercise of political authority and therefore have a much greater destabilizing potential. Especially in cases like those submitted to our judgment, these are acts that undermine the democratic architecture of our social and democratic state of law, proclaimed in Article 1.1 of the Constitution. The public prosecutor also argued this in their final report when they stated that corruption was eating away at our democratic system. The Supreme Court goes on to say that in these cases, corruption operates as a phenomenon that distorts the purpose of power, weakens institutional checks and balances, and compromises the equality of citizens before the law. The previous statements about the harmful effects of corruption are not mere doctrinal discussions, but are included and derived from various international texts and from our own case law. This is one of the most important sections of this very long 224-page ruling, which of course, based on what it says, is that Aldama, Ábalos and Koldo did in fact operate as a criminal organization and that this was indeed proven throughout the trial. So, that purchase of masks, how was the famous Jessica Rodriguez and Claudia Montes favored? How was the house paid for Jessica Rodriguez as well? How was José Luis Ábalos himself paid with a house in Cádiz as compensation? Precisely, well, A, for obtaining the license for Villafuente, Villafuel, etc. I think one of the most important points is of course how the Supreme Court decides to suspend the sentence of Victor de Aldama. It must be said that indeed, because of his cooperation with the justice system, as we have been saying, Aldama deserved a reward. Because if not, then all the people who cooperate with the justice system, if they're going to end up in jail anyway, it doesn't make any sense and no one would cooperate. Let's read now. Finally, what the ruling says about the sentences and punishments and exactly what the Supreme Court says. Ruling. For all the reasons stated, in the name of the King and by the authority granted by the Constitution, this court has decided that we must convict and we do convict the defendants we have listed for the following crimes. José Luis Ábalos Meco as the perpetrator of the crimes listed, in which there are no circumstances that modify criminal responsibility. One criminal organization offense and another continuing bribery offense. Cumulatively, carrying penalties of 5 years and 6 months of imprisonment and disqualification from the right to stand for election for the duration of the sentence for the crime of criminal organization, and 5 years of imprisonment, a fine of 20 months with a daily rate of €50, special disqualification from employment or public office involving the management of public assets for a period of 12 years, and special disqualification from exercising the right to stand for election for a period of 12 years for the continued crime of bribery. Also for a crime of bribery under Article 416. Cumulatively, with another offense of influence peddling, carrying penalties of 3 years and 6 months in prison, a fine of 14 months with a daily rate of €50, and special disqualification from employment or public office. Also, 2 years in prison for other bribery offenses. One offense of influence peddling with a sentence of 1 year and 6 months in prison. One offense of embezzlement of public funds. That sentence is to be served consecutively with another count of influence peddling with a sentence of 3 years and 6 months in prison. Another bribery offense with a sentence of 9 months in prison. Another bribery offense with a sentence of 9 months in prison. Finally, it says he is acquitted of the remaining charges. Well, I have to say that's a lot of years. That's what José Luis Ábalos got. That's right, just to recap, it's 24 years and 3 months in prison. That's what José Luis Ábalos got. But the Supreme Court makes it clear that the actual sentence to be served is 15 years and 18 months in prison. Although he was sentenced to a longer term, the actual time to be served is 15 years and 18 months. We also have here the sentences against Koldo Garcia, which add up to 19 years in prison, and honestly, the sentence is really harsh. Here the Supreme Court breaks it down. The crime of criminal organization, bribery, influence peddling, embezzlement, and more counts of bribery. And let's read, because it's also especially interesting, what it says about Victor de Aldama. It says that he is sentenced to 4.5 years, but then it says that this one remembers. For this convict, the suspension of the execution of the prison sentence is imposed for a period of 5 years. Conditioned on not committing any crimes during the 5-year period, on appearing before this court every 6 months to report on his work, commercial or business activities, proving compliance with the legal regulations, and on performing community service for 1 year. Okay? So it's important. Also, as civil liability, the convicted Ábalos and Koldo must jointly and severally compensate Inico and Traxatec, respectively, with €34,450 and €9,500. Let's remember, that's where Jessica Rodriguez was given a job. The same is ordered with respect to the 3 defendants. The confiscation of the profits from the crime of bribery in the amount of €430,000, honestly, that's a lot of money too. According to the following breakdown, and there, well, the details are itemized and the accused are convicted, Ábalos and Koldo. Each of them is responsible for 4/15 of the court costs, and the convicted Victor de Aldama is responsible for 5/21 of the costs incurred, declaring the rest ex officio. Well, as you can see, a devastating ruling from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sentences José Luis Ábalos to 24 years and 3 months in prison, Koldo García to 19 years in prison, and Victor de Aldama to 4.5 years in prison. For the first case tried in the Koldo scheme, the so-called mass case. The Supreme Court also makes it clear that Aldama will not go to prison because the execution of his sentence is suspended, due to the cooperation that the businessman has provided to the justice system, which has helped to clarify the crimes that were being investigated in the case. Devastating ruling from the Supreme Court against the government of Pedro Sánchez. Ábalos was the right-hand man of the Prime Minister and also in the Socialist Party. Here is the breaking news, everyone. We will keep you updated as always here on Medidas Cautelares. That's all for this edition of Medidas Cautelares. I hope you enjoyed it. You can join as members for under €3 a month or as Supreme members for under €7 a month. You can also make contributions at 627-556-370. Devastating ruling from the Supreme Court against Sánchez. Share the video with whoever you want, and thank you all very much for your support and attention. The most important thing, as I always say, is that this information reaches everyone because information is power. See you soon.